So recently I reviewed my 2016 MacBook Pro, and we've seen light improvements to the 2017 MacBook lineup. At Worldwide Developers Conference, we saw some processor enhancements, not much else. That's really about it. We got some GPU enhancements as well. But a very common question I've been getting is, what about the 2018 MacBook lineup? So let's talk about it. So a lot of you are probably thinking I'm going to predict or recommend that Apple go the full touchscreen keyboard route, as I made a video a while back about one of my favorite MacBook concepts out there, where instead of having a touch bar just at the top, the entire base of the MacBook is a touch bar. You get haptic feedback with the keys, and then you just have basically two displays, one visual, one interactive. It could even support the Apple Pencil. Now, that's what I want. However, I think that's so far out there, I think that it's a bit too distant for the market as of right now, that Apple likely isn't going to do that in 2018. So with today's video just being about the 2018 MacBook lineup, here's once again my prediction slash wish list, what I think will happen as well as what I want to happen. First of all, I have to say that while there are a lot of complaints about the lack of ports on the MacBook lineup, I think they're pretty much okay. I think it's okay to tell people that we're moving to USB-C, and we should try to get everything to move to USB-C as soon as possible. And they are showing that in a couple ways with the MacBook lineup. However, there's a couple things I would change. Apart, of course, from the whole enhance the processors themselves. Take it for granted that all of the MacBooks next year will have faster CPUs, better storage, better RAM, hopefully better battery life, things like that are assumed, okay? But first of all, the 12-inch MacBook, I definitely think is one of the coolest MacBooks Apple has ever made. It's incredibly light. It's more capable than people realize. You can actually edit 4K video with Final Cut Pro on it, just barely. You know, it's not gonna edit super well, but it is possible, and it's amazing that a device that thin and a MacBook without any fans in it is able to pull off that kind of video editing. However, my one complaint with it is the fact that it only has one USB-C port. However, on the other side, it does sport a headphone jack, which is definitely kind of hypocritical from Apple to be like, no, headphone jacks need to die, we need to switch to wireless on the iPhone lineup, but then when it comes to the 12-inch MacBook, they're like, oh no, we need a headphone jack on there. It's probably just because it doesn't take up much space in the MacBook itself, but it definitely makes for confusing lineup, because if Apple wants people to buy their products, it means that they'd have a pair of headphones or maybe a pair of speakers or optical ports that works with the MacBook but does not work with the iPhone, and I find that kind of bizarre. So what I would prefer is, instead of having one USB-C port on the 12-inch MacBook that has to do everything, instead you have two, one on either side, and you ditch the headphone jack. Now, because Apple, when they removed the headphone jack on the iPhones, they included an adapter, I think they could do the same thing with a MacBook, a USB-C to audio jack adapter, if they absolutely believe that certain professionals are going to need it. But what this would allow is one side can be used for charging, and actually either side can be used for charging, which is something I really appreciate on my MacBook Pro, is that unlike the older MacBooks, it doesn't matter which side I charge from. There's a lot more freedom there, and I think it compensates for lack of MagSafe. So there's one point, is that you can charge from either side, but also people who are buying the 12-inch MacBook are not super professionals. They're not buying it necessarily because they need the best specs, they need the best GPU and CPU. This is definitely about portability. So that's why I think Apple should treat the 12-inch MacBook as what the future of laptops should be, similar to how they're treating the iPhone, with no headphone jack and moving their way into wireless charging, into not having ports at all in some of the future updates of the iPhone. I think that the 12-inch MacBook should be the example of what the future of MacBooks can be. So it's okay to ditch the headphone jack, because most people who are going to be using this 12-inch MacBook are using it for regular use and are probably not using it for the extreme powerhouse that it is, because it's really not a super powerful computer, but thanks to Final Cut Pro optimization with macOS, it can get a lot of stuff done. So I think using wireless headphones on the 12-inch MacBook is a lot more common, and a lot more people buying it are likely going to be okay with it. And you can have one USB-C port for charging and the other one for importing footage, having an external monitor. And I really hope, I'm not sure about this, it would be kind of tricky, that with next year's updated processors, they're able to support Thunderbolt 3 on at least one of the ports on the 12-inch MacBook. The USB-C they currently have is pretty strong. It can output a pretty large resolution, but it's not quite to the Thunderbolt 3 standard that we find on the MacBook Pros, which allows very fast transfer speeds, and it allows adapters like the Quack to work on it, which allow it to plug in, 3 traditional USB ports and HDMI, power, Ethernet, all in one single adapter, which is really convenient. And finally bringing Thunderbolt 3 to the lightest and thinnest 12 12-inch MacBook, I definitely think a lot more people could get excited for it in that regard. Now, in regards to the MacBook Pro, we have lots of them with touch bars and Touch ID, and despite what a lot of people think, I'm actually fine with 4 USB-C ports. I talked a little bit about this with my friend Xander on the Tailosive Tech podcast, but while I've used my MacBook for a lot of things, I've actually never run into the situation in which I needed a 5th USB-C port. On the 15-inch one at least, they're all Thunderbolt 3, they're all full speed. I can run 2 monitors, I can be wirelessly charging my phone from the MacBook Pro, and be accessing an external hard drive, and like I said, charging it all at the same time. So I think 4 is a pretty decent number. However, if it did allow for the battery life to be improved, I would be fine with removing that headphone jack. You guys know me, not a big fan of it, and I definitely have never used it once in the year I've owned it. And like I said, any MacBook you remove the headphone jack on, include the USB-C to headphone jack adapter, just to say that, okay, if you professionals absolutely need it, take it through this included dongle. But we do have one MacBook that's actually more popular than a lot of people think, and it's the function keys one. There's only 2 USB-C ports, and they're actually both on one side. I reviewed this about a year ago, and I noticed that having them all on one side is actually kind of limiting. Like what I said about the 12-inch MacBook, is that on that particular MacBook Pro that doesn't have the touch bar, we have the USB-C port on either side. We can remove the headphone jack, like I said, if you need to. If it doesn't help very much, then fine, I don't care, keep it. But because that MacBook Pro has a lot of the newer processors and GPU that a lot of people appreciate in a mobile macOS device, a lot of people actually went that route. They went with the function keys because the touch bar and Touch ID sensor, while really cool and while I think they are the future, but not necessarily a requirement anymore. After a year of using it, I can totally understand someone saying, yeah, it's neat, but I don't really need that on my computer. Taking that out of the machine itself lowers the price significantly, which is why my next pitch for the 15-inch MacBook Pro is that Apple should probably start making function key versions of all MacBook Pros, even the ones with 4 USB-C ports. I know a lot of you would probably look at this as backpedaling, as in Apple's admitting that they did something wrong, but I still think there's a smart way to do it. For instance, I recently found out that the MacBook Pro I got last year in 2016, which started at $2,000, is no longer available from the Apple Store. They've updated the GPUs and CPUs to be faster, but the starting price is now $2,400. My proposal is that you bring back that 15-inch MacBook Pro, except this time with just function keys, but it still has the same CPU as mine and the GPU as mine. That way some people who want that extra size and want that extra CPU and GPU can get it, but they don't necessarily have to go past $2,500 to pay for it. I think the MacBook Pros, in terms of tech specs that you can upgrade them to, are pretty significant. And I know there's complaints for everything about them, but I don't think much of the complaints is that the tiers for the higher end MacBook Pros aren't expensive enough. They get up to $4,000 very quickly, but to be fair, it is a very capable laptop with 2 terabytes of SSD, really strong CPU and GPU. So I get while they're expensive, but I think to get people excited again for the MacBook Pros and to get people thinking like, oh, maybe this is worth the investment, you could make similar model tiers for both the 13-inch and 15-inch MacBook Pro that contain the 4 Thunderbolt 3 ports, but just ditch the touch bar, ditch the Touch ID so that they're at a lower price point. Just imagine the MacBook I have right now, except without the Touch ID and touch bar, perhaps starting at around $1,900 to $1,800. That's far more reachable for a lot of people, and I'm sure that when Apple doesn't release MacBooks for a long time, sales probably dip, and I think this would be a really easy way to get people what matters in a MacBook, which is software optimization and getting them used to the future that is Thunderbolt 3 with USB-C. I've really enjoyed it. I really appreciate switching everything to one last port because now I don't have to think, where do I plug this in? Or I don't have to think with old traditional USB ports, did I plug this in upside down? Which way do I plug it in? Or if I ever got up and had my headphones plugged in, I had to worry about pulling the laptop off the desk. I don't worry about these things anymore because with the new MacBooks, Apple is encouraging that you use a minimal amount of cables and wireless whenever possible. And I think one last thing that could get people really interested in MacBook Pros and 12-inch MacBooks again, more color options. People are actually really in love with the 12-inch MacBook because you can get it in gold, you can get it in rose gold. Some people think that's weird, but I think that given MacBooks don't sell, like as crazily as iPhones and iPads do, perhaps it wouldn't be too hard in the factory to add a couple extra color options. I could imagine a really dope looking product red MacBook, where a lot of people proposed a matte black MacBook Pro, which would look really, really cool. Instead of a space gray finish, a just solid black. And some people out there even suggested jet black, but I think that would scratch up way too easily. It would look really cool the day you bought it and then just fingerprints forever. But either way, that's my pitch for the 2018 MacBook Pro. Again, Again, no real evidence. I'm pretty sure they're not gonna do anything I suggested in this video. However, that's what I'd like to see. For those of you guys commenting about what are my opinions, what are my thoughts, I wouldn't necessarily be buying one because this one is still holding out strong, and finding out that there were new colors or slightly faster processors wouldn't make me want to buy one. But still, for those of you who haven't yet, I think those changes I listed would definitely incentivize a lot of people who haven't upgraded from their older MacBooks to upgrade now. They would see like, oh, they're coming down in price and they're still getting faster, so worth the upgrade. What would you guys like to see in a 2018 MacBook Pro? I know a lot of you are probably thinking, I want my SD card slot back, but Apple typically doesn't bring things like that back. I don't think they will this time. I'm still supporting the ports they've chosen with USB-C. I just mainly want a rearrangement of them. I think that's so convenient to have them on both sides and have them both be Thunderbolt 3. Let me know all your opinions and thoughts in the comments below. This is your Apple Sheep here, and I will see you in the next one.